So here we have, again in red now, so need to know, production of an annotated diagram of the digestive system. Well, it's quite unlikely that they're going to ask you to draw the digestive system, but when they tell you that they want you to be able to have this skill, that means they're going to give you a blank diagram, quite possibly, I've seen this on several IB tests, quite possibly, and ask you what's ABCD. So here's some parts that you're going to identify. So if we look at a diagram like this, hopefully now in your educational life, you can pick out stomach, you can pick out esophagus, right? We'll go in order, right, as your food goes down. Esophagus, stomach, then small intestine, the one that wiggles all back and forth. And then that connects over here to your large intestine that kind of forms like a picture frame around your small intestine and then goes out. And then some things that send things like enzymes and hormones into this tube system are therefore part of your digestive system. The biggest one by far is liver up here. And then the most likely two for you to get confused, I would think, because they're pretty close together. You know, who knows what's what. You've all heard of a gallbladder. That's going to be tucked up in here right under the liver, as opposed to the pancreas, which is tucked in here right where the stomach curves into the first part of the small intestine. So keeping those two straight is probably the hardest one if you get a diagram like that and they ask you which is which. All right. So right where, just while it's here, right where your small intestine attaches to your large intestine, that part called the cecum, there's this little blind thing called an appendix, which, remember this? We use this as an example of what kind of structure? A vestigial structure. It really doesn't do much of anything in us, which is why you can take it out and you have no bad effects. But its existence is evidence of an evolutionary process suggesting you came from ancestors that had this little part here that actually had a function. Some of that function is in digestion, as you would guess. Some of that function is also in immune system stuff. Okay. So here we also have lots of enzyme stuff that could get folded in a digestive story. A lot of this, again, if you're not told you need to know this or that specifically, they can tell you a story about the digestive system, just like in AP, and expect you to understand the principles of things like how enzymes work, what things affect enzyme action, and be able to apply it to a specific story about, for instance, an enzyme like amylase that first shows up in your saliva, produced by the cells that produce saliva. And this, as its name suggests, helps break down that starch we call amylose, a plant starch, which is in a lot of our diets to a good degree, right? So that starts in the mouth. This starts to break down both animal starch and plant starch that might be in your lunch. And then the lipids and the proteins don't get digested with the help of it. Why? Because it's specific. Why is it specific? Because it's got a particular shape of that thing called its active site. And so we can again fold enzyme action into here very, very easily. So here we have a green one again, which means, you know, look at it, don't pay it. It's not a need to know thing. But here's a word that you might see when we get to hormones. The glands that we've talked about mostly so far are called endocrine glands. Glands like testes and ovaries and things like that, and they secrete their chemicals, mostly hormones, into your bloodstream. Endo, into you. That's really inside of you. What does exocrine gland mean? Well, these glands secrete things to the surface of your body. Sweat would be the most common exocrine gland, right? Or the lumen of your gut. The lumen means kind of the space, the opening, like in the middle of your stomach, right? In the tube, right? Of this long tube that we collectively call your gut. So how is that out of you? Well, it really is, right? If this is your mouth, okay? I'll give you a smile. If this is your mouth, and this is the other end. This is the anus, right? We can do a very simple diagram of your digestive tube as this, right? It's got a bigger part here that we call your stomach. It's got a part here we call your small intestine, large intestine, but really it's a tube with two ends. And as such, it's not really inside of you. Your lunch, even though it seems like it's really deep inside of you when it's in your stomach, is technically not inside of you. It's just in this tube that goes through you. To actually do you any good, again, the molecules of your lunch have to get past these walls and into all the cells out here, which is where they're going to serve as nutrients. So that's why anything that sends stuff into this lumen is actually sending it out of your body, because it's sending it into this tube, which is in essence really the outside of your body. You've got an inner outside, the walls of this tube, and an outer outside, your skin. Okay, so here we have a thing, green, so maybe not specifically ask you, but what is this about? Acid conditions favoring hydrolysis. This is a classic example in every textbook of how pH can affect enzyme action. You remember your graph where we had pH at the bottom and rate of reaction on this side, and at a pH of 2, this one enzyme had its peak. That's the one that's in your stomach, called pepsin. Pepsin breaks down peptide bonds, right? Name sounds like that, and therefore means it breaks proteins into amino acids or smaller chains of polypeptides. It is in its correct shape and works best when it's in a pH of 2. Lots of hydroniums in there, right? On the other hand, in your small intestine, this is your classic textbook graph, is a enzyme called trypsin, also breaks down proteins. It works best at a pH of 8. In your small intestine, that's what the average pH is, right? So this could work its way into all kinds of enzyme-related digestion posed kind of stories about when food goes from your stomach, where it mixed with pepsin, to your small intestine. It doesn't leave the pepsin behind, but the pepsin no longer works in your small intestine. Why is that? It's because your small intestine has a pH whose charge workings denature the pepsin enzyme and put it into a non-working shape. So there you go. So here you have another story about different kinds of things. One of them is, here's the interior surface of your stomach, which is kind of small print, I know, right? There's big pits called gastric pits. Gastric is a stomach word, called gastric pits. What does this do? Just the fact that we have these long invaginations, foldings, increases the surface area of what your lunch is likely to bump into, right? So we have that increase of surface area, increasing a function which is related to surface area story here. What if they told you this story? This is not a specific in the syllabus story, but what if they told you this one? That there are sensors in cells, I'll put it that way, where activated pepsin in your stomach activates more of these molecules that in a low pH generated themselves into pepsin, pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is an inactive pepsin molecule. Why is it inactive? It's not the right shape. What makes it active? When these acids start to get secreted into your stomach. What do we call it, right? When something that increases results in an even greater increase in itself, positive feedback. Here's another positive feedback kind of thing.